Chapter 5. Together. John was only days away from reaching his second full year in space. Time had blurred into an endless cycle of work and routine. He'd just completed the final connection of the ring nodes, carefully verifying that the entire structure was assembled with precision. The next phase would be installing the central engine and integrating it with the station's framework, a process that would take another 6 months. Then, another 6 months to bring the oxygen systems online, making the modules habitable. By the time he was finished, the station would be a bare-bones but functional environment, just enough to support the first wave of astronauts. John's mind drifted, his thoughts wandering down an endless timeline. Another year of working alone stretched before him. It felt like there was no end. Sighing, he prepared to leave the central spacecraft habitat, the small metal shell he had called home for the past 2 years. Just as he reached for the hatch, a sudden urgent transmission crackled through his headset.
John, we've been reviewing recent data, and we've detected something that requires immediate correction.
His posture stiffened.
Understood. Send me the details and I'll get to work.
John replied, his voice neutral, but the response sent a chill down his spine.
No, John. This isn't something you can handle alone. We're sending an expert to deal with it.
John's breath caught.
Wait, what?
His pulse spiked, his mind racing. A human expert.
John, please remain calm. We're monitoring your vitals, and we don't want to alarm you. But this was something we anticipated. We are prepared.
His fingers tightened around the edge of the console.
Okay.
He forced himself to breathe.
Then tell me, when will this expert arrive?
A long pause. Then...
John, the expert has already entered low orbit. The spacecraft is on final approach for docking.
The words struck him like a hammer. What the hell? Every mission, every decision, every single resource allocation was planned down to the last millisimal point. There was no room for surprises. Sending another human into space was a monumental sacrifice, a risk that could not be taken lightly. It made no sense. His heart pounded as he tried to contain his frustration.
This is highly irregular. If you had this planned, why wasn't I informed sooner?
The voice on the other end remained calm.
John, I need you to trust me. The expert will be there in exactly 20 minutes.
John exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. He didn't like this. He hated this. Everything about the mission had been designed with extreme precision. Every human life was precious, and the idea of risking another person out here in the void was unthinkable. And yet, somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger, a thrill of anticipation burned in his chest. He hadn't realized just how much he missed human presence, not until this moment. For the past 2 years, he had survived alone. His only contact with Earth had been through voices and images transmitted across quantum communication, intangible and distant. Now, someone was coming. Someone real. The docking bay hatch hissed as it pressurized, sealing off the outside void. John stood still, his eyes locked onto the figure stepping into the decompression chamber. The astronaut's suit was identical to his, bulky, protective, impersonal. The visor, made of specialized polymer, obscured the face within, leaving only the faintest shadow of movement behind the reflective glass. John had already attempted contact. Silence. The communication link was open, but the newcomer had offered no response, no acknowledgement. Everything about this felt off. Then finally, the astronaut reached for the locks on their helmet. With a swift motion, they removed it, and John saw her. It was Emma. She was smiling. The warmest, most beautiful smile he had ever seen. John's heart slammed against his chest, his pulse a wild, uncontrollable rhythm. His breath hitched, his mind caught between reality and hallucination. Was this real? Was his isolation finally fracturing his mind beyond repair? Had he lost himself so completely that he was seeing ghosts? The decompression door slid open, and before he could say a word, Emma launched herself toward him. The force of her embrace sent them tumbling into the bulkhead, their bodies colliding in zero gravity. John felt her arms tighten around him, shaking, clinging to him as if afraid he might vanish. He caught her face in his hands, his fingers trembling as he traced the familiar contours of her cheeks. Emma was crying. Tears floated weightlessly, catching in strands of her hair, but her eyes never left his. Pure joy radiated from her, overpowering everything. John was still struggling to believe it, still drowning in disbelief, until she spoke.
"Did you think you could escape me so easily?"
Her voice was soft, trembling from emotion, but unmistakably real. And in that moment, John knew. It was her. It was really her. Not a dream, not a hallucination. She was really here. A sob clawed at his throat as he pulled her into a crushing embrace, his body shaking from the weight of emotions too powerful to contain. He had resigned himself to never touching her again, never feeling her warmth, never hearing her voice beyond the cold distance of transmission lines. Yet, here she was. Thousands of questions flooded his mind, but none of them mattered right now. Not when she was here, alive, breathing, holding him. Emma pressed her forehead against his, and then they kissed. For a moment, the universe ceased to exist. No space, no mission, no survival. Only them. It was not just a kiss. It was a reunion of souls. A collision of longing, relief, and love. So raw, it felt like their very beings were fusing into one. It was a piece of themselves they hadn't realized was missing, now found, now whole. When they finally pulled away, breathless, weightless, overwhelmed, Emma was the first to break the silence. She knew what he was thinking.
"We knew you needed help, John."
He blinked, still reeling, but she continued.
"Everyone in the underground knew. We saw it happening. We saw you fading. Even if you tried to hide it, we knew the pain of isolation was consuming you."
She cupped his face in her hands.
"This wasn't a decision made lightly. We've known for a long time."
John swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper.
But why you?
Emma's gaze softened, her resolve unshaken.
"Because it was always going to be me."
She took his hands in hers.
"I couldn't sit there and watch you suffer. I couldn't stand by while you carried this weight alone. It was unfair, putting all of humanity's future on just one man. You didn't have to endure that alone, and I wouldn't let you."
She smiled through her tears.
"I've been training for a year. I worked my ass off to make sure I was ready. The underground wouldn't have allowed me to come otherwise."
John's throat tightened as another thought pierced through the haze of emotion.
But, Ellie,
Emma sighed, the mention of their daughter bringing its own ache.
"She knew, John. She's known from the beginning. We talked about it, long, hard conversations."
Emma exhaled.
"She even considered coming herself."
John's breath hitched. "Ellie, here?"
"She knew you were suffering."
Emma gave him a bittersweet smile.
"She's grown up into a remarkable young woman, John. You would be so proud."
Her voice softened further.
"She's already making a difference. She's studying spacecraft engineering. She's started research into quantum reactors. She's not just waiting for the future, she's building it."
John's emotions overflowed again, crashing into him like a tidal wave. And he broke. He buried his face into Emma's shoulder, holding her like a man who had been drowning for years, finally breaking the surface. Everything, the weight of isolation, the crushing loneliness, the unbearable responsibility, it all melted away. John wasn't alone anymore. Not only that, he would share this journey with the person who completed him, the woman who was his home, his universe. And for the first time in 2 years, John Anderson felt truly alive again.